Hello, and welcome to Safe Pasture. I'm Sherry Hammers, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of the Holy of Holies. Last time we were talking about God's protocols for the Ark of the Covenant, or it was also called the Ark of the Testimony, and the mercy seat, and how God was very particular about who could come into the most holy place, or the Holy of Holies, what had to happen when they did enter in with a high priest one day a year, the Day of Atonement. And then we were talking about when the tabernacle would have to be moved. God had the Levites, they were the ones that God commissioned to move the Ark of the Covenant. So I ran out of time last time, but I wanted to continue there in 1 Samuel 4. And this is a really important story because David did not understand what happened. I think he was really upset with the outcome of this. But I'm going to go ahead and start at verse 1, and we will read all the way through verse 11, just to kind of set the stage of what was happening here. Okay, it says, "And the word of Samuel came to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines to battle and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched in Aphek. And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. And when the people were come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. So the people sent to Shiloh, that they might bring from thence the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth between the cherubims. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God." And I just want to say the reason they wanted the Ark of the Covenant brought to them is that the Philistines had slaughtered 4,000 of their men. And they said, we've got to change our strategy here. We need the presence of the Lord, which that's what the Ark was to them. That's where the presence of God was. Then moving on with verse 5. "And when the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord came into the camp, and all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the earth rang again. And when the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they said, What meaneth the noise of this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews? And they understood that the ark of the Lord was come into the camp, and the Philistines were afraid, for they said, God is come into the camp. And they said, Woe unto us, for there hath not been such a thing heretofore. Woe unto us! Who shall deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that smote the Egyptians with all the plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and quit yourselves like men, O you Philistines, that you be not servants unto the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Quit yourselves like men and fight." And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent. And there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. And the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were slain. So you see here that even though Israel thought this was their kind of like a good luck charm. They're like, yeah, they thought they could just take God with them. And if you remember, we didn't really read this time around, but God had a certain way that he wanted the Ark of the Covenant, when they would move the tabernacle, God had a certain protocol for how it was supposed to be wrapped up, who was supposed to carry it, everything. And they didn't consult God on this. They just said, we're going to take this with us. And they presumed that this would give them the edge in this battle. And God pretty much showed them that they suffered greater losses because they were not paying attention to what God said had to happen. If you look in Psalm 78, verse 56, it says, talking about the Israelites, it says, Yet they tempted and provoked the Most High God and kept not his testimonies. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant was called also the Ark of the Testimony. the ark of the testimony being the Ten Commandments, the actual two slabs of stone that had the Ten Commandments engraved on them. So they kept not his testimonies. That can have a couple different meanings, but the word keep means to protect. I mean, they physically did not take care of even the actual tablets of stone. And the thing that represented, he was spelling out to them in the Ten Commandments, these are the things I need you to obey. These are the things that you cannot go against without some kind of consequences. So there's physical, at a very base level, physical commands that were not kept. And then the very fact that those Ten Commandments represented obedience. And so they were disobeying on a lot of levels with this situation. And then after we're skipping around a lot in the history here. We're skipping ahead. But then we go to 2 Samuel chapter 6. And at this point, Israel, with David's leadership as king, Israel was able to get back the ark from the land of the Philistines. And so here's what happened. We'll start again in verse 1. It says, again, David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. And David arose and went with all the people. It's interesting. Let me interrupt there. But if I'm not mistaken, when Israel was... Yes, there it is. Let me go back to... I just realized this. 1 Samuel 4... And I think it was verse 10. It says, the Philistines fought and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent. And there's a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. Isn't it interesting? We get over into 2 Samuel 6, and it says that David gathered together all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. I don't see those as mere coincidences, but anyway, I think it's interesting. Israel lost 30,000 men when the ark was lost, and now they're going to recover it with 30,000 men. And David arose, in verse 2, David arose and went with all the people that were with him from Baal of Judah to bring up from thence the ark of God, whose name is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, that dwelleth forever, that dwelleth between the cherubims. So there's another reference to the mercy seat. And they set the ark of God upon a new cart, and brought it out of the house of Abinadab that was in Gibeah, and Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, drave the new cart. Well, if we would go back, we won't go there right now, but like I said, God had a protocol for how the Levites, if you recall, the Levites were the ones that God said should wrap up the ark, and when Israel would move throughout the wilderness, it was the Levites. And it doesn't look like it's the Levites. It doesn't look like it's being done the way God said. God never said to put it in a cart. I guess they thought they were maybe doing okay because they put it in a new cart. It was brand new, never used. And maybe they thought that was a good thing. But none of this is how God said to do it. Just like the way they lost the ark was not of God. They didn't seek God. And we don't see any evidence here that they were seeking God on getting it back. So in verse 4, and they brought it out of the house of Abinadab, which was at Gibeah, accompanying the ark of God, and Ahio went before the ark. Then in verse 5, and David and all the house of Israel played before the Lord on all manner of instruments made of fir wood, even on harps and on psalteries and on timbrels and on cornets and on cymbals. And when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, Uzzah put forth his hand to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen shook it. Now, if you recall, the ark, God said when he was telling Moses how the ark was to be constructed, it had rings on it. And in the images we show on here, you can see the poles that would go through the rings. The poles were for the Levites to bear the ark. They were to carry the ark by these poles. Well, so they've got it in a cart, and oh, let me go back to the poles. The poles was so that no human was making direct contact with the ark itself. Because this is representing and the seat of God's presence. So here we're violating all kinds of things. It's not being carried right. The oxen that were pulling the cart there shouldn't have been oxen. There shouldn't have been a cart. It should have been the Levites. But they had oxen. The oxen stumbled on this road. Well, it says here the oxen shook it, but I've read other, I think in the Chronicles, it might say, or it might be in other translations, that the oxen stumbled. So Uzzah puts out his hand. He's thinking, oh, the ark's going to fall out of the cart. It's going to hit the ground. So he reaches out his hand, and it says he actually took hold of the ark. And then it says in verse 7, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God smote him there for his error. And there he died by the ark of God. God wasn't kidding. God said, this is how you handle this. It's not to be handled casually or the way you think it needs to be done. And David was displeased because the Lord had made a breach upon Uzzah, and he called the name of the place Perazuzah to this day. And I think that means literally breaking out against Uzzah. And David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, how shall the ark of the Lord come to me? So David's got some respect now for, oh, wait a minute. We don't even know what we're dealing with here. This is serious. Because he's saying, gosh, I don't even want this thing coming to be near me because I don't even know what I'm dealing with. So in verse 10, so David would not remove the ark of the Lord unto him into the city of David, but David carried it aside into the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite. And the ark of the Lord continued in the house of Obed-Edom, the Gittite, 3 months. And the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. All right. And I know this is kind of a long passage, but bear with me. Verse 12, it says, and it was told King David, saying, the Lord hath blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that pertaineth unto him because of the ark of God. So David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom into the city of David with gladness. I don't see it here, but I would, yes. Let me look at verse 13. And it was so that when they that bear the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed oxen and fatlings. And so in verse 13, it says, they that bear the ark. This sounds like the Levites now are bearing the ark on the poles, the way God said. It looks to me like David has now figured out, we need to see and research, what did God say about handling the ark? And it looks like that's what he's doing here. And then it says, and David danced before the Lord with all his might, and David was girded with a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. So we see there that this, I just want you to get, I know we've gone into a lot of detail. Thank you for staying with me through this. But this is extremely important because this is the part of the tabernacle. This is the place we've been trying to get to on our journey. And we need to see how God is so important to him that his presence be handled with the reverence and the respect. Because if we go back to the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sinned, God drove them out of the garden. 1, because they had disobeyed, but 2, they now were evil in the presence of a holy God, and his glory, his very essence of holiness, would have struck them dead, just like it did with Uzzah. So I just want you to understand that, so that when we get into more the application of how this affects our relationship with God, I think you'll see the magnitude of how important that God's boundaries of his holiness with us, not just to keep us at a distance if we are ungodly, but to protect us. Like I've said before, God's glory is like fire. Fire can be a good thing, or it can, out of control, it can be a bad thing. And so you have to respect fire, whether it's even whichever side of it you're on. You have to respect the power of fire, and how much more so the glory of God. Let me see what we've got here. Yeah, I think I'm a little over time now, so I'm going to end it here. And again, thank you for joining me, and hopefully we can kind of wrap up the Ark of the Covenant with the mercy seat in the next video. Thank you so much for joining me, and I can't wait to see you again. Thank you.